Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Facebook Live with Nigel Farage. And we do this because I get so many questions, letters, emails, texts. It's very difficult to actually answer them all. So what we've done here today is we've advertised this earlier. You've sent in thousands of questions and we tried to give this some sense of order by putting them into categories. What could possibly go wrong? Well, apart from a knock at the door from the Kent police, maybe they don't want me to even talk about some of these subjects. I don't know. So unsurprisingly, given my visit to Hastings, my two visits to Dover, the knock on the door at the dead of night from the Kent police, we've got quite a lot of questions that have come in on this whole issue. So I'm going to start with those. Louis asks me, please ask Priti Patel to come on TV and tell the truth on what she is doing to turn illegal migrant boats back. Well, there's no point, because it wouldn't last very long, would it? It'd be one word, nothing. Look, Priti Patel, as Home Secretary, I'm sure that her heart is in the right place, but she finds herself with a Prime Minister who's never been very good on these issues. Indeed, when Boris was Mayor of London, he even talked more than once about having amnesties for illegal immigrants, which just says, please come on down, as many of you as want to come as possible. She is in negotiations with the French, but at the moment, we're looking pathetically weak. Do you know, since lockdown started, 854 have come into Dover alone. That's without those that have landed and escaped, and some who've been turned back by the French Navy. Vanessa asks me, very good question actually, are your statements about illegal immigrants being listened to? One of the reasons, Vanessa, I went and started to do these videos is because there was an absolute wall of silence in mainstream media. So I went out and started to do this, and the abuse didn't take very long in coming. I mean, we had sort of sneerocracy of the Times and Sunday Times. We had this sort of abuse coming through the Mirror and elsewhere. And it's as if we're not supposed to even discuss this. It's all too awkward, too embarrassing. Don't discuss it in front of the children. But I tell you what, Vanessa, we have had millions, and I mean millions of views of those little videos. Sorry, the sound quality wasn't so good on one of them with the wind. And as a result of that, yes, national media are now beginning to cover this story. And I think if we hadn't done this and made a noise, it would just have been brushed under the carpet. William says, hi Nigel, have you any idea where all those migrants are being held, or are they just being released into society? Well, William, some go to Gatwick, some go to Croydon, but all the evidence is that actually people are not being kept for very long at these centres. There is big fear, particularly during coronavirus. I've seen in the last few weeks evidence that in a Norfolk village, for example, 100 people have been put in an old sort of disused RAF hut. But I've also equally had reports from Slough and places like that people are just out wandering the streets. But be in no doubt that quite a few of these people cannot afford the 5,000 euros they're being charged by the smuggling gangs to come. And they, in the end, get picked up to pay off the price, which means they go into a form of modern slavery. And it's about time the Islington set, who think they're being so lovely and so worldly, encouraging people to come in from the camps in Calais, it's about time they understood that what they're actually doing is backing a really horrific modern criminal trade. Steve says, is foreign aid still being sent to other countries? If it is, should it stop until the pandemic is over? Oh, Steve, we'll go on giving foreign aid with this mob in charge. You bet your life. In fact, David Cameron said that us paying the highest level of foreign aid in the world was his finest achievement as Prime Minister. Foreign aid budget currently running at about £14 billion every single year. So the answer, I'm afraid, is yes. Roger says, why aren't you more concerned by the removal of liberty in this country? Roger, they knocked at my door, mate. I mean, at the dead of night, as if to intimidate me. I did, by the way, the next day, go down to Maidstone and hand deliver a letter to the Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent and to the Chief Constable, saying that what I thought had happened was absolutely outrageous How could I mean, given there are reporters, photographers from all sorts of media organisations all over the country, why was I the one person that got singled out? I mean, I wasn't breaking lockdown, I was doing my job. Did Neil Ferguson, Professor Neil Ferguson, did he get a knock at his door for breaking lockdown when his married lover came to visit him? I don't think so. So look, I am concerned about this loss of liberty, and I will go on talking about it, I promise you. Eliza says, I'm trying to understand why the world has gone on lockdown when the recovery rate is over 98%, even without a vaccine. Well, Eliza, that depends, doesn't it? I mean, look, I don't think that we should underestimate just how nasty this virus is. You know, a lot of younger people have been laid very, very low with it. It is nasty, it is horrible, it is killing a lot of people. Yeah, sure, I know that big outbreaks of winter flu kill a lot of people too, all right? If the government had pursued its initial herd immunity strategy without lifting a finger or doing anything, many hundreds of thousands would have died. And all right, I know that 91% of those that have died are over 60. But does that mean their lives are of no value? No, I think going into lockdown, given we were fighting an enemy we'd never confronted before, to buy ourselves some time was the right thing to do. My regret is we did it too late. You know, we were allowing the Cheltenham Festival to take place, allowing football games at Anfield to take place, whilst the Irish were stopping their annual St Patrick's Day parade. We were too late into lockdown, and we will now be too slow in economic terms, I think, to come out of it. David says, why do you think you're different to other folk and break the stay-at-home rule? Because I got a job, David. I got a job. I broadcast for LBC, I write stuff for Telegraph Online, and I broadcast through this medium to people like you. I'm engaged in a national debate. And if I hadn't gone down and done this and put these videos out, we wouldn't even be talking about it. And, you know, I don't think we should be party to modern slavery in Britain. I don't think we should be increasing the risk of coronavirus coming into the country. And I'm also very, very concerned, you know, who's to say ISIS aren't coming through this route or anybody else? Okay, we got lots of you on here following this because these debates matter and you may not hear some of the answers you're going to get from me elsewhere. So please, if you think these matters are important and need a wider audience, share this video, do it now so that we can spread the message. Penny, why are France and Ireland exempt from quarantine? Well, Penny, historically we have a common travel area with Ireland. You know, we had the historic break in 1921. We've had a common travel area with Ireland ever since. I think that's understandable. France, well, I think the reason is quite simple. It's the 10,000 lorries a day that come through the Channel Tunnel, stuff full of European goods to sell into the British market. I think that's the reason why. Or it could be the Cabinet want a holiday in Dordogne. I honestly don't fully know the answer to that. Lewis says, what repercussions, if any, do you think there should be for China once we get through this crisis? Lewis, I think in terms of geopolitics, what happens between the West and China over the next year or two, it is without doubt, certainly in my mind, the most important geopolitical question since the Cold War and ultimately the fall of the Berlin Wall. It is incredible that China, despite the lies and despite everything else, are now actually benefiting from this crisis, being seen to be the good guys, you know, sending out medical masks, gowns, ventilators. I mean, none of them work, of course, because everything made in China is total and utter rubbish, but they're coming out of this as the good guys. And isn't it amazing? Anyone that criticises them is immediately accused of white supremacy, immediately accused of racism. And the problem is, what governments have we got with the guts to stand up to China in the future? And is it the European Union? Is it hell? You know, they even were forced by China to change one of the papers they'd written about the crisis. Is it Australia? Well, economically, the Aussies have become very dependent upon China, but they kept them out of Huawei, and actually Scott Morrison has sounded pretty tough. But ultimately, it's going to have to be America that leads this. And Trump, whatever you think of him, whatever you think of his handling of the crisis, whatever you think of the way he does press conferences, Trump is the guy that gets this. We need Trump to be re-elected because on his own, Boris will not, in my view, confront this issue. What I am pleased about is we've now got voices like David Davis, Ian Duncan Smith, who are coming out very clearly saying Huawei is the most huge political error we've made in this country for years. Helen says to me, rather than behave like the toxic media and journalists, don't you think it's about time you started to show some support towards this government in these trying times, instead of behaving like a lefty loony? Helen, do you know something? These arguments were put in the early part of 1940. You know, Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister. We had had a very difficult start to the war. We didn't have the right kit. The tanks were utterly useless. The aeroplanes were in too short a supply. The Norway expedition turned into, frankly, a fiasco. And there was talk that maybe the time had come to get rid of the Prime Minister. And everybody, you can't do that. We're fighting a war against the Germans. You can't get rid of the Prime Minister in the middle of a national crisis. I mean, that would be, shooting your own side in the back. Well, thank God, enough Tory MPs did have the guts to stand up and say, Neville is not the right man for the job. And we got a leader who was the right man for the job. Do you know, if there hadn't been a few of us out there pointing out that Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Officer, had let the cat out of the bag over herd immunity, that would have been government policy without us ever actually being told it, either by Boris or that weasel Hancock, the Health Secretary. So I think criticism did actually change government policy. And let me ask you, is it wrong to criticise what the government are doing on PPE? Given that people working in care homes, people working in the NHS say that at times the lack of PPE is like playing Russian roulette with their lives. In response to this, Boris appointed Lord Dayton to take over PPE, a former Goldman Sachs banker, well, of course they all are, aren't they, who now has been in the job 3.5 weeks, and we've not heard a dicky bird from him, which I find just extraordinary. I mean, just completely and utterly extraordinary. So no, I will praise the government where they get it right. I think the way the Nightingale hospitals, I mean, they've not been necessary, but the way the Nightingale hospitals were put together was brilliant. Just shows you what the army can do. In fact, they do emerge out of this in terms of helping to put that hospital together, in terms of distributing kit around the country. At least there are some parts of our country that are still working. I will praise the government where they get it right, but I will certainly criticise the government where they get it wrong. And one thing that is now becoming clearer is we're not allowed to criticise the NHS in any way at all. Not at all. The whole thing's wonderful. The NHS is the envy of the world, the Prime Minister told us in his 50-page document. Well, without taking away, particularly on the 200th anniversary of Florence Nightingale's birthday, without taking away anything from those on the front line doing their damnedest and taking risks with their lives, massive mistakes have been made. Public Health England, a quango, stuff full of overpaid people not delivering. In health terms, I think the biggest mistake that's been made are the sheer number of people who were sent from NHS hospitals back into care homes in the first half of March without being tested for COVID-19, who were carrying it, and that has contributed massively to the now growing, huge death toll in our care homes. The truth is, if you look at the ONS figures, the mortality rate is 50,000 higher for the last few weeks than it's been for any comparable period over the last 5 years. Not all of those are deaths due to coronavirus. Only 50% of acute heart patients are actually getting any medical help of any kind at all at this moment in time. And that, of course, is the most common killer in this country. And that, whilst we have 35,000 empty hospital beds. No, look, constructive criticism is the right thing to do, as is praise where it's due. And by the way, be in no doubt, thank goodness Boris survived and got through this, because whatever criticisms I might have of Boris, He is, without doubt, head and shoulders above the rest of this pretty useless cabinet. Nora says, do you think this is a wake-up call to become self-sufficient in farming and industries? Nora, I was amazed the other week that Sir Malcolm Rifkind, former Conservative Foreign Secretary, Europhile, anti-Brexiteer and all the rest of it. And I was talking to him on Sunday morning on LBC. And we were talking about China and talking about the extent to which we've become so dependent upon China. And he said, look, 80% of the antibiotics that we take in this country are manufactured in China. We cannot allow ourselves to be in a position where we can be held hostage by China. I think this crisis will lead to a big rethink. I think the great battle that I've been engaged in, which is basically globalism versus the nation state, I think this crisis has accelerated what was happening already. I think the Brexit vote of 2016, the Trump vote of 2016, many other big political changes going on around the world, I think it's the nation state that wins from this. I can't see the European Union, frankly, even surviving it. And I think the idea that things may be a little bit more expensive if they're made at home, but at least you've got security, I think that will take hold. And I hope and think in terms of food and drink and things like that. I hope we rethink where we've got to. And I hope we start to put quality over quantity. And I do see some evidence, actually, of people wanting to buy things, excuse me, that are grown and produced locally. So I do have some hope for that. Wendy says, pubs that are throwing away beer, why not let people take their jugs from home and buy it? Wendy, I've been going to pubs with 4-pint milk cartons and getting beer put into them. Those kind of things are happening up and down the country. People are trying to find entrepreneurial ways of getting themselves back moving economically. Equally, even with closed garden centres, there were ways where you could put an order in and arrive and they'd chuck it in the boot. So people have been trying. And that, of course, is why traffic volumes on the roads are up. All well and good if you work for a bigger firm and you're furloughed. But for those that are self-employed out there, for those that are self-traders out there, they are basically getting very little from this government. And they're desperate. And they've had to go back to work in whatever way they can. Sadly, what tomorrow brings us is the opportunity to go out and exercise as much as we want. But hey, cyclists and others were doing that already. We can play golf from tomorrow, which is a bit of a relief to some. We can go fishing tomorrow. Why that was ever banned, I do not know. But in terms of business, let's be frank. Officially, lockdown goes on until at least the 1st of June. But in reality, lockdown is broken and people are beginning as much as they can to get back to work. And provided we do understand that social distancing matters, provided we get that things like wearing face masks make sense, I haven't got a problem with it. I think it needs to happen. Seb says, hi Nigel, can you say hi to my wife Christy and our kids please? I certainly can, Seb, no problem. Nathan says, what's the biggest fish you've ever caught, Nigel? Well, that was a bull shark in Kenya, when it was a fun place to go in about 2001. I think it was about 500 pounds, something like that. But I think perhaps the most exciting fish I've caught are tuna, just because of their speed. They just go and go and go. And isn't it amazing? They're back in this country in real numbers. The last 4 years in a row have seen a tuna run from the Scilly Isles up to almost as far east as Brixham and indeed over to the Channel Islands. And I'm not talking about one or two fish. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of big tuna. Now, these are worth money commercially. You know, when a good-sized tuna on the slab in Plymouth Fish Market is worth 12,000 quid. But a place like Devon and Cornwall, and the Channel Islands too, who could encourage anglers, sport fishers from all over the world to go and catch them, each fish caught would be worth a lot more than 12,000 quid dead on a slab. And yet, under EU rules, we have zero commercial quota for landing and selling at market bluefin tuna, whereas the French, Spanish and Portuguese have about 23,000 tonnes between them, and we're banned from targeting them as anglers. Now, one or two people have been ignoring that. Indeed, I was in Cornwall last year and we hooked one by accident, you do understand. But, again, part of this, getting back our coastal resources, getting back our fisheries, being able to regenerate some of these parts of the country, and environmental terms, doing absolutely no harm at all. So I'm really keen and look forward to that. Michael says, why are the kids expected to go back to school before MPs are going back to a full House of Commons? Well, it's a good point. I mean, Jacob wants everyone to go back to the House of Commons. Look, I think it's very bad for children not to be at school. It's as simple as that. And I hope they are going to go back in June, but I doubt it. I doubt it for two reasons. I think the unions will be quite resistant. And in one way, do you know what? They'll be right. Because teachers, quite sensibly and rightly, will say, have we got the right PPE equipment to do this job? And if this government is too incompetent to get PPE out to the NHS and care homes, what hope is there of getting it out to the schools as well? So I think this will all be delayed, a lot longer than perhaps many would like. Mark says, Nigel, what are your thoughts on vaccines? Well, smallpox was one of the great killers in the world. It has been eradicated by vaccines. And I know there are anti-vaxxers out there. I know there are people, very sceptical about MMR and things like this. Look, on balance, I take the view that vaccines have been a very, very good thing. I don't necessarily want Bill Gates to administer vaccines to the whole world, but on balance, I'm for them. Look, if you're enjoying this, share this video. Let's get some of these arguments out to a bigger and bigger audience. Tony says, what's your favourite pint of beer and why? What a free one, Tony, really. I've been very lucky, actually, that a lot of people over the last few years have bought me pints in pubs because they want to get a photograph with me, and so they can tell their mates. But I tend to like the lighter alcoholic beers. I tend to like the sort of lighter, hoppier type beers rather than the darker malty beers. So I'm not going to advertise particular breweries here and now, but I did, spend my drinking youth in South London, where Wandsworth did have a brewery. It's gone now, called Young's, and I guess that's what I started with, and I'm still pretty keen on it if I can get it. Paul says, I would be interested to hear what you think the government need to do to get the economy going again, with particular reference to the housing market. Well, Paul, the housing market, the private market, the commercial market are by far the biggest part of the UK economy. They're completely frozen at the moment. Commercial property, if people really do start working from home long term, and there's no doubt that Zoom calls and all the rest of these things, this technology has been around for years. We've just chosen not to use it, really. So that it could be problematic. Housing, I don't know where the housing market is. It's down, but I'll be very surprised if it wasn't up and running again by late summer. I really, really would. Kate says, when can I see my family? Can you answer me? Because Boris couldn't. Kate, the absolute cock-up on this, of the Boris statement on Sunday night, and then Raab appearing to contradict him the next morning. Very odd. They should have published the paper first and then perhaps made statements on it. What I did hear today was there are people flying in to Gatwick Airport from Minsk in Belarus. Minsk, where there's no social distancing, where a maniac dictator says, just drink vodka. It's not a bad idea, but just drink vodka and coronavirus will go away. And they're coming into Gatwick, and apparently many of them are coming in to visit friends and family. We can't even do that. The rules on this are you can go and meet one parent, go and meet one grandparent, and then meet the other one afterwards. That is where we are. But I do think there is And I mentioned Minsk, I mentioned Gatwick. There are small numbers coming in now, but I do think that during lockdown, the idea that we should be at times where there are bad chief constables and overzealous policing, virtually living under house arrest, at the same time people can come into the country from all over the world, has been a bit outrageous. Fiona, when are you wearing your shorts next again? I had them on earlier, Fiona, although it was frosty this morning. It could be frosty again tonight. And I don't think the camera view you've got of me tonight goes down to the shorts. Maybe that's a good thing. Are you setting up the Home Guard? Will you be Corporal Jones? Well, I'm certainly saying don't panic, Ken. And I don't think we quite yet need a Home Guard, but who's to say? Donna says, you're good looking, Nigel. What pills are you on? I need some. I'm not on any pills, Donna, at all. No, there is a recipe for good health, and I'd recommend this to younger viewers. If you want to be fit and feel relatively well into middle age and beyond, the recipe is very simple. It's gin and cigarettes. No, it isn't. It's to do exercise, and I have actually been doing some exercise over the course of this period. I've lost 12 pounds. It's not bad, is it? Lewis says, would love to see you do home exercises, Nigel. Lewis, I haven't quite got to the point of making exercise videos, but you never, ever know. Dawn says, where did you get your Union Jack shoes? Yeah, I on VE Day, I was wearing the Union Jack shoes, and I was given them. I was given them as a 50th birthday present. They don't get worn very often. There aren't many occasions where you can wear them, but they are really a great piece of fun. I don't know what it was like where you were. I certainly saw a lot of houses, a lot of places, putting up flags and doing things for VE Day. The big sadness, well, two sadnesses really. One, that a lot of those old boys who perhaps in some cases for the last time could have attended something big in their local town or in London, didn't get the chance to do so. And there was something else I would like to have seen, and that would have been the Queen, who, by the way, has given more leadership than the Archbishop of Canterbury or Boris Johnson or anybody. To see the Queen on the balcony at Buckingham Palace, 75 years to the day that she was there herself in uniform with her father, King George VI, and Winston Churchill. And that would have been a great thing to see. I would have gone to the Mall myself to see it. And I was very sad, very sorry that couldn't actually happen. Okay, we're coming towards the end of this. Remember, share this video, share it now, share it again from the start. Let people hear some of the arguments they will not hear elsewhere. Aaron says, Nigel, I don't actually know your opinion on Sir Keir Starmer. I think he's very dull. I don't think there's much spark. I don't see a great personality. But I'll tell you what I do see some competence. When Jeremy Corbyn was at the dispatch box, you could see the sort of seething rage and anger and hatred that he had for anybody, well, basically to the right of Tony Benn. And in a way, Boris made it pretty easy. Corbyn made it pretty easy for Boris. I think the first couple of times we've seen Keir Starmer, he's been quite forensic. He's asked good questions. He's had points wins, but he certainly hasn't had knockout blows. I slightly question the party political broadcast, effectively, that was on the other night, where I think he's a little bit too political. But no, Starmer is going to give Boris a run for his money. Boris goes for bluster. Starmer's going to go for detail. It's going to be a very fascinating contest to watch. Ricky says, is it a bit late for airports to introduce screening? Well, Ricky, it's never too late to stop importing a nasty disease into our country, not checking anybody, letting them get the London Underground. Look, it should have happened months ago. It is an absolutely catastrophic failure. 130 countries around the world put restrictions or effectively total bans on. We, of the last 18 million passengers that came into our airports, 273 were quarantined. That, to me, is failure on just the most astonishing scale. Going on from here, the real secret to getting life back to some normality, which, by the way, Germany's doing. Angela Merkel, who, by the way, doesn't like me, I've sat opposite her at lunch. She looked like she'd just eaten a whole lemon. But that doesn't matter. She's running Germany efficiently and well, running it a damn sight better than we're running our country. Germany will emerge economically by far the most powerful European country. And it's about testing. It's about isolating. It's about tracing. I wonder whether Matt Hancock is up to it. Thank you for being with me this evening. Hope it's been useful. Hope it's been worthwhile. Certainly thousands of you have sent in your questions. I've done my very best to answer them. Stay safe, but do, if you can, in any way, just help do something to try and get our economy moving again. Do you know, there's a lot of people on furlough at the moment, enjoying getting 80% of their money with fewer overheads. Some of them drinking beer in the garden at midday thinking, isn't life great? But actually, a lot of them, unless we get this economy moving, will not have jobs to go back to. And that's really, really important. And don't worry, I'll be active. I'll be back in Dover within the next few days. I'll keep the campaign going. And we're going to watch Brexit because we're in negotiations now with Barnier. We have to give notice whether we're going to extend by the 1st of July. The government is saying all the right things. But if I'd trusted what Conservative governments had told me over the years, I'd never have got anywhere. Have a good evening.